Well, here we are. It's the Wednesday edition of the Writ Race, and if you've been following along at home, you'll know that this is the daily routine that John Wright and I have been keeping since the federal election was called 2 weekends ago, and whether or not it was necessary or not is really irrelevant. We're in the throes of it now. And so we've been trying to kind of stay up with some of the stuff that happens on the campaign, but more than anything, I think, is to look forward in terms of what we should expect. And so we've made an effort to bring in some of the brains, the eyes, the ears that are attuned to that sort of thing. So we're happy to welcome in Amanda Galbraith from Navigator, a principal there, but has rattled around in a few political offices over the years, and so has some insights into what's playing in the leaders' room and the kinds of things that are going to resonate beyond the immediate media. Amanda, I know you're busy, so it's great of you to join us today.
Hey, thank you very much. I think you guys are just as busy as I am. So it's election times are always kind of fun for this stuff.
Let me start with just your general sense of where you think this campaign is and what we should expect in the next, say, 10 days as we get closer to the debate. And I'll just leave it wide open for you. I'm just curious to get your own sense of the trajectory here.
It's certainly not the campaign I thought we were going to have. That's for sure. I've been surprised, I think, by many that the Liberals have come out sort of flat-footed. I think, we were talking before we came on air here, and John mentioned they've found their feet in the last few days, and I would generally agree with that. And part of that, I think, is just the going negative, which is good for them. But yeah, I don't know how you call an election campaign and you say this is the most important election since 1945, and then you don't articulate a clear ballot question on day 1 or day 2 or day 3 or day 4 or what day is it, 11? We still don't have one, which is bizarre to me. And further to that, I thought, okay, they'll have a big platform, they'll have stuff in it. And it's not announcing platforms as early as the NDP and the Conservatives have done is unusual, right? The Conservatives, I think, made a lot of sense. But the idea that they are running on a budget that they passed in the House of Commons, so they could have just implemented it anyway, to me, doesn't wash. And all that stuff is in the weeds, like really in the weeds for folks like us. But I think the broader public is this why are we here question has hung around so much longer than it needed to if they just had a cogent answer to that. On the flip side, I think from an O'Toole perspective, he's benefited greatly from lowered expectations. I mean, I said at the beginning of this, if he put his pants on and showed up, people would probably applaud him, which kind of happened a little bit the first week. Although they've run a smart, relatively disciplined campaign, except for a couple screw-ups. And then Jagmeet Singh, I think the NDP to me is going to be a really interesting spoiler in this because he's a good campaigner, right? He shows well. I think he's very relatable. All the polling kind of says people like him. He's never going to be prime minister, at least not this round, likely. So I don't think he gets quite the scrutiny that the other leaders do. But this time he doesn't have a party that's kind of after him as much as last round. They have money for ads. They've been advertising. And let's say he does get a bump at the end like he did last time. They could actually put some dollars behind that to sort of lift their vote a little bit more than they did. So I think we have an NDP that's a bit more formidable than before. But I will say the doldrums of this campaign to me are already kind of like, it's blah. Like second, third weeks are always a bit blah. And I think we're in there for sure.
We're in the middle of meh. Yeah.
Meh.
So to your point, when you talked about the Jagmeet Singh challenges in the last campaign, we've seen what's happened to Anna-May Paul just heading into this campaign. It's not unusual for there to be sort of, intrigue in the palace. It doesn't matter when, particularly before a campaign. And it was funny, just before you came on, I was flipping around and I found a report, and it was an Ipsos poll talking about how the Liberals were so far out in front back in March that, they were going to run away with it. There were concerns already in the Tory party and the caucus about their new leader. What are they going to do about it? What could they possibly be doing? It's naive to think that some of those conversations aren't going on. But I was surprised yesterday to hear Brett James suggesting that there are some high-level Tories who are still thinking Aaron O'Toole's not our guy. And, to what degree do they have to keep that quiet? Because as soon as that becomes part of the narrative, it becomes an easier thing to chew at, where he's, kind of arguing in his own party as opposed to taking on Trudeau and Singh.
I mean, conservatives we eat our own, right? We're the worst for that. Like, all the parties do weird things. Conservatives eat their own leaders faster than any other party to our advantage or disadvantage. And it used to be, at least you got kind of 2 kicks at the can. That's not the case anymore. In particular, if you saw with like Scheer was, don't let the door hit you on the butt on the way out, right? So there'll always be factions. I think in particular, there are rumblings within the party for sure. But as long as he continues, I think, to perform in this way, they're quieted. But you've always got, there's certainly you always got people sort of moving about there. And I think like Pierre Poliver is an example, right? Like, well, he's running and, whatever. He launched that very flashy ad, which he then ran on TV and like I think it was CTV Newsnet or something in Ottawa. That's not a typical thing you'd have a MP do in your riding, right? That wasn't designed to appeal there. That's designed to make him look like a leader in waiting. And that's people do that in other parties as well, but I think certainly that was noticed by conservatives. But given, I think Aaron has done a good job. I think generally also people kind of seeing Aaron out and about, he's kind of showing the personality that we've all known, people have known for a while. Like I've known Aaron for ages before he was an MP. So I think we shall see. But yeah, certainly if things tides turn, conservatives are very quick to jump on one another very quickly, and I would anticipate that will happen.
Yeah, well, it was interesting yesterday, John, after we got off the air with Brett, we were just chatting, yakking away about what are the prospects if the Liberals only hold on to what they've got. What's the future of Justin Trudeau? And, I asked whether or not it was one of those things where Trudeau would have to resign, make time for another leader to get in there, not make the same mistake that Kathleen Wynne made in Ontario. Brett was very pointed in saying the Liberal Party is the Trudeau Party. And so he could pretty much do what he wants, win or lose. It's a place where Aaron O'Toole has to make the Conservative Party his party to be able to kind of command that level of, respect, or just being able to say, this is my own destiny. I'm going to do what I want here.
Sure. And one of the ways in which he's going to have to show that is picking up seats. And right now, if you look across the country, everything is pretty much stagnant to where it was at the end of the last campaign. So despite a good, solid week for the Conservatives and really no screw-ups, they're kind of where they were. And so is Mr. Trudeau, although, the overnight polls are going to fluctuate every once in a while and the Liberals are up a little bit. I think that Mr. O'Toole's had a really good start to this campaign. But I can see now where the Liberals had a really bad beginning, that they're starting to get their feet on the ground for 2 reasons. Number one, it's almost like somebody who I would call a wagon master has actually stepped into the middle of the campaign and pulled it together saying, we're going to do an announcement here, and we're going to do it on here, and we're going to do it in the morning so it drives the day. So we had yesterday and today where we've had 2 solid announcements. We have had housing and we've had, the tax on the banks. And in the same with O'Toole, his campaign's going okay, but you see where the Prime Minister is actually starting to place the wedges. So he's wedged O'Toole on the healthcare issue, which may mean that, things bumped up in the polls for a couple of days or so. But he's now wedging the left. He's now going after and doing what the NDP would normally do, and that is, I'm going to tax the banks. I'm going to go after people who aren't paying their taxes and avoiding them. We're going to make the rich pay, that sort of stuff. So you can see that in order to move ahead, he has to neutralize O'Toole, but he's also got to reap some benefit from outflanking the left. So I see that as a bit of an emergent strategy over the next week or so. To that point, I'm not sure what Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives do to drive the vote higher than what they have. They've brought their policy in. They've played the nasty cards. They'll try to do some more of that against Mr. Trudeau, but I don't yet see any traction on the ground. And I'm a little surprised at that. I thought that, they would be slightly more ahead from where they are. But as we said yesterday, it's a little bit like Einstein's theory of relativity. You think you're going forward and the other person's going back. Mm-hmm. And the other person's gone back and you think you got momentum. Well, you really haven't. So that's where I think the Liberals, I'd give them the last 2 days and I'd say that the Tories are holding their own.
Well, man, it's not unusual for the Liberals to have to fight a war or a battle on 2 fronts. And they've become fairly deft at that and in being able to steal the best ideas from the NDP. The challenge that they've got this time, though, is Aaron O'Toole is positioning himself as a progressive, small p, conservative. And it's harder. I mean, even on the healthcare thing, I'm listening and I'm thinking, I don't hear it as the boogeyman story it was 2 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yeah, I think there's some danger. Listen, I think they're effective, right? These attacks, they do them every time. I've literally been involved with conservative politics for, it's been 20 years now. Mm-hmm. And I've never been involved in an election campaign where the Liberals have not accused the Conservatives of being in favor of two-tailed healthcare, have a hidden agenda on abortion and LGBTQ. And sometimes there was more merit to that given the leaders' positions than others. I think the benefit here that Aaron has is he's like very authentically says no to those things. I still think the attacks smack because there's they're not even designed really to move. They're not designed to move like potential conservative. Like those are after they're scaring the NDP, right? That's what they want to eat their lunch there. So yeah, they're sophisticated at it. It makes sense. I think the Conservatives' job is to take the teeth out of that stuff as much as they can. I think they're doing like a pretty good job of it. But I think most Canadians, other than us, right, are just hearing noise about Conservatives' healthcare and like they're hearing that just volume, and they're not digging into it as much. So I think there's some fight there to be done. The other thing I find a bit surprising, to be honest, is how the Liberals shifted. They launched an attack. It looked like it got their footing, like even on like the abortion issue, and then they stepped on their own message the next day with a big announcement that frankly didn't get as much traction as it should have. They seem to be kind of leaning into this healthcare thing, which I think makes sense because it seems to be working a little bit. But the balance remains to be seen. I really do feel like it's sort of, I guess, the pregame. Like we're kind of watching, like it's like the NFL right now. You're kind of watching the pregame, and come September, when we see the ad money drop, when we see like what their earned is going to be like, or sorry, their paid media campaigns are going to be like, that really is going to tell the story of the kind of campaign that these guys are going to run. These may be sort of trial balloons to see what works, what sticks, what doesn't. But I think it's good to see that, frankly, as a political animal who likes a good race, the Liberals needed to get off the mat a bit, and if they needed that first week to get, frankly, the shit scared out of them, then like what it looks like now to me, to John's, it's a hungry campaign. They're driving messages. They're shifting around. They're announcing in the morning, we're going to go here. They're not releasing a full itinerary, full day, right? And we haven't seen the Conservatives adjust to that yet, which I think they're going to have to.
When I reflect on what Brett James talked about yesterday, Amanda, it was really to your point, and that was, he was saying that we see two different campaigns. One of them is above the surface, where we have the mainstream media and the newspapers and all that, and the other part is below, where it's highly micro-targeted to the Facebook groups and all of the social media. And I look today, and you see the report that the Liberals outspent both the Conservatives and the NDP by a long shot combined in the first week or so. So there's two different campaigns going on. One is their campaign to try and motivate people individually based on highly calibrated targets. And then there's the bigger picture where, we have Maryam Monsef, the minister today, who through her own mistake referred to the Taliban as brothers because of the Muslim connection. And that's getting an awful lot.
I've got the clip. Let's, if it was a mistake, because I want to hear it, and then I want your take on that. So
I want to take this opportunity to speak to our brothers, the Taliban. We call on you to ensure the safe and secure passage of any individual in Afghanistan out of the country.
So when we talk about the two campaigns, John, I mean, and Amanda just made the point where they seem to gain some traction and then they step on it. They're gaining right, and they're gaining some traction here. Let's face it, that wasn't a mistake. That was a prepared statement.
Well, actually, it was. I thought she was freelancing to the point where she was referring to it in the communal sense, my brothers, because of the religious connection of being Muslim. I mean, that's what you would do. But inappropriate as a minister, completely, especially when she then went on to, and even the prime minister had to respond to it while he was doing his press conference, calling them, exactly what they are. Terrorists, we're not recognizing them, things like that. But it goes back to Amanda's point, and that was that they've had a good day usually, and then it gets stomped on by another event that is beyond their control. And that's what we saw today. And it was interesting where the Prime Minister said, when asked whether or not why we weren't getting updates every day on COVID from Dr. Tam, and it was kind of like, well, we'll hear from them when it's necessary. It avoids her being a voice to stomp on his campaign as well and have to answer a bunch of questions there. Right. So, I mean, I when I say it was a mistake, I thought it was a political mistake, but I think it was a natural thing for her to say until she caught herself and then moved back.
Amanda?
I think John's interpretation is very generous. I think it was are we swearing on this podcast, or are you not swearing?
You must.
Go ahead.
I think it was a fuck up. There
No
are images
question.
coming over here of they're horrific. People are pitching babies over barbed wire fence because the Taliban are doing awful thing. Let's not kid ourselves. I'm impressed with their PR war, but I'm not fooled by it. And I don't think Canadians are either. Her calling them brothers, she should know better. If you're at that office at that level, you should know better. True. And not only that, but it's interesting. I really care a lot about the Afghanistan issue. I know that most Canadians are not going to vote based on that. I don't see this as Syria 2015, even though I think there's the elements of it, but it's incredibly disruptive, to your point, right? There's a reason that it's a pain in the ass to campaign when you're in government, because you still have to run that a little bit, right? You evacuate all the offices, but there's always one or two staff back there to kind of mind things. But that's not your A team. It's not even your B team. It's your C minus D team. And we've got this huge international event that normally would be occupying all of them. And you've got these ministers out there freelancing, right? This is the first time this issue came up and somebody fucked it up. And he's got to answer for it. Yeah, for sure Theresa Tam is down because they don't want daily announcements about the fourth wave. That would be really difficult to justify a campaign. So I would do it if I were them. I think it's crudely political. I think this was another thing that'll not, and even if it doesn't knock them off message with Canadians, it distracts the media enough that their stuff isn't going to cut through. Their announcement today, which was an interesting one on the banks, I thought very interesting given he's been the Prime Minister for 6 years and, it tax left. I think it makes sense for them to kind of try and eat the lunch there, and it's an easy thing to understand. But we're talking about brothers as opposed to that, which tells you how much of a disaster that is.
Yeah, and it is a disaster. The other thing, though, when you look at this is, what does it really take 4 ministers on television answering media questions to deal with this issue? I think, again, they have everybody with their hands on this rather than trying to narrow who's talking about what. The background circumstance is terrible. And the United States is going to leave in the next 48 hours because, it's before the 31st, but they've got to get their troops out of there. So we're out of there. The only thing that you're left to believe is that of the 20,000 or so that the Americans have uplifted and taken out of the region for the last few days, Canada's going to get a bunch of those and bring them over to our country. But it's not going to take the place of Canadians left behind or collaborative, Afghanistan representatives being collaborative with us. So it damages them because it's going to continue on. But I still don't understand why we've got 4 ministers dealing with an issue that could be talked to by one. And it just goes to a bad organization in terms of how to respond to things.
So we've clearly had the range of response right here in terms of how the minister behaved, how appropriate it was, and how damaging it might be. And I think you're right, Amanda. We doing what we do, we're down in the weeds all the time, and we're picking up on this. The Twitter sphere goes crazy. The degree to which general, listeners to the podcast or the folks who are just kind of going about their daily course of events, they're not really caring about it. But it occurs to me that in this meh period of the campaign, where these sorts of things are happening, they're putting the rake out in front of them, whatever party, step on it, bang, right between the eyes. Everybody else watching this, as far as the other parties are concerned, are taking notes, they're taking the clips, they're taking the quotes, and you got to know that that's all going into the prep book for the debate. So when probably they have most of the attention, most of the eyes on this campaign might well be the debate, and then, the 8th and 9th of September, this is all going to come back all at once within an hour of conversation and television. So it may be new to some people in a couple of weeks, but it's that kind of bullet that, they're loading the gun against themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think these will be, I'm sure they'll splice that up and put that to an ad in some fashion or other, if it's targeted at, if it's, released with money behind it or just released period, to either destabilize one party or another. I definitely think that will happen. I will say, I think one point on the meh part of it, which I called it, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of this time, because as much of it's a bit of a grind for the media on the buses and the planes and the campaigns and all that kind of stuff. There was a funny thing that happened in 2006, which was one of the longest campaigns we've had in 50 years, about 8 weeks long, right? And it was over Christmas. And I was in the Conservative War Room at the time. And we had like a downtime. We worked right up until Christmas. I got to go home for 2 days and came right back. But that period over Christmas, when people were at home and kind of coalescing around, like that's actually when stuff shifted for us, and we started to win. So, the long weekend in August, in September rather, I think like that, like all of our next weekend, I should say, I think all of that is important, and will be important, and actually stuff may stick more there than we believe. So to me, it would behoove the parties to move. The other thing we talked about earlier, which is the below, the iceberg analogy, right? The below part. I'm highly curious to know what the Conservatives are doing. Like I know today I was talking to somebody who's with the campaign this week, like a reporter, and they told me, it's interesting. Like they had an announcement this morning, and then they're sort of left to their own devices with sandwiches until an event in the evening, and O'Toole is off doing other stuff. So what's he up to? What's the targeting there? Because the Liberals are whistle stopping and visuals and all that traditional thing, and that's giving a sense of momentum. And I think like stuff that's translated to the media, but the Conservatives clearly like, we do not care about appealing to that. We are going to do our phone things or our micro targeting or whatever that is, and we probably won't see the fruits of that labor for weeks or at best. So I think it'll be interesting to find out, maybe in the after action stuff, or somebody tell like, what's he doing for 6 hours today? I would love to know.
So back to the numbers then, and kind of to your point in terms of those strategies that are under the surface, Amanda. A lot of the polling, and of course the mainstream media, we love the horse race number that Nick Nanos pops up and the guys at Ecos, and they all do it. And interesting to see how closely they seem to be aligned as we've gone through this campaign to date. But people keep telling me, well, what do the polls say? Well, I said they're telling you what people were talking about 3 days ago is what they do. So it's not a predictive tool. It's only telling you, kind of taking a pulse right now of where we are. But there are two other numbers that, John actually floats. And one of them is approval rating. And the other one we see Nick working on is, who do you think is best suited to be prime minister? And I think there's a nuanced difference there. But Amanda, if you were looking at those numbers and advising a leader, which of those numbers would they most be interested in or worried about?
Between approval rating and best PM?
Or versus the horse race.
Oh, yeah, I would not pay attention too much. I mean, the horse race numbers we're seeing, like I love them too, right? I look at them. I look at them every day. I look at John's stuff. We do some stuff in Navigator every day. Like I love it all. But if I'm them, frankly, I'm ignoring most of it. And I am looking at my internal polling. In particular, you want your regional and localized breakdown, because like we don't vote by popular vote here, right? We win by ridings, and which is why the horse race things are nice, but it doesn't matter as much as, can you make that breakthrough in those 2 seats in Quebec, or why is everybody in Hamilton this week? So that's where I think I'm jockeying a little bit. I think obviously Erin O'Toole's undecideds, which is normally a big problem for Conservatives, being that unbranded. It's also unusual, because normally the Liberals do a better job of branding you, but I just don't think they had the space because of the pandemic, and Aaron didn't have the space to brand himself. But so far it seems to be somewhat playing in his favor. But again, we have not seen the unleashed potential of all the third-party ads, other than that one Ford truck thing. We haven't seen the ads from, like, real attack ads yet from the Liberals or the NDP, if they choose to do that, which they may do nominally, but I'm guessing they'll go against Trudeau. So I'd probably be ignoring all of it. I actually prefer, whenever I've worked with candidates, it's just like, you want to keep them in a box, because they're like show ponies, right? They have to perform. So you actually have to really restrict what they're seeing. And even if they're doing poor, like I've been on campaigns I know we're losing, and you don't tell them. Like you can't tell them because they still have to go out and meet all the people and shake all the hands and raise all the money and be motivated. And it's like an athlete. Like if you tell the athlete, yeah, you're fucked, you're not going to win. Like that screws with their heads. So it's a weird game. And it's also a weird game because they're consuming media. Even though you're telling them stuff, they're always secretly consuming media from their friends or family or whatever things. I used to call like the BlackBerry advisory crew. It's like, oh, they're in their ear. What's happening now?
You know, there's one thing that I have been tracking that I don't release, and I will at some point, but there's a series of questions that you have on whether or not they deserve to be reelected, whether he deserves to have, and I'm very careful in how I word this, an uninterrupted mandate of 4 years, whether they've done a good job and they can take us out of the pandemic and move forward. Like there's a whole series of metrics there. And I will say that I got the numbers in last night, and it had a significant effect over the first 10 days because we started out, I always look at those numbers and say, look, if to Amanda's point, we elect people in fractions. If you get 37 or 38% of the vote, you're going to get the majority. So just concentrate on what that is. So I always look at the numbers and say, if it's all over 40 to 43, if it's in that range, then you're doing pretty well. I can tell you that across the board, the difference in 10 days ago to now would have been from 43 to 32 on almost every one of those measures. So below the line, there has been some movement. It's not on a vote number per se, but they were having some impact on all of those measures, which effectively are the Liberal measures. So I think that goes to the point that we saw them slipping and falling over the last week or so. They're starting to pick themselves up and move forward, but it was having an effect. There's no question in my mind for that.
Well, it's great to have both of your insights, particularly you joining us from with your sense and experience in the war rooms and on the campaign. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for having me and my salty language. I appreciate it.
It's always welcome. It's politics, for God's sake.
I swear like a trucker, and I did the podcast for 1010, and they were like, the listeners were shocked at how much I swear.
You're such a nice girl.
Yeah, exactly. She sounds so nice and kind. And I'm like, F this.
Exactly.
And then
But Amanda, they tune in next time just to see how bad it might be, and it's all about the ears.
Indeed. So thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Amanda Galbraith, the principal at Navigator, John Wright at Maru Public Opinion. I'm Dave Trafford. This is The Writ Race. It's an Eye Contact podcast.